Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. Thank you for joining us on this rainy day. I'm Annie Burke. I'm the Executive Director of Together Bay Area, and I'm also a member of the California 30 by 30 Partnership Coordination Committee, or the PCC, and really honored to bring to you another conversation about 30 by 30 and what it means and how we can help make it happen. Here in this Zoom space are a lot of important people that help make Together Bay Area possible, and can't see them all, but I want to acknowledge them all. Laura Rosenthal on my team is here, Tom Robinson, who you'll meet in a few minutes. They're board members and policy committee members and lots of other folks who help this regional coalition work. And I just thank you all for being here and want to acknowledge that there's a lot of people who make this regional coalition possible. Welcome to everyone here who's in the Bay Area physically, and to those who aren't. I know that there are a few folks who are joining us from outside of the Bay Area, and even though our organization's name is Bay Area, has Bay Area in it, we welcome everybody from outside of the region. And the Bay Area is certainly a part of the state of California. I'm just really glad that we can work together on this state goal. And so just welcome you all. I would love it if you would introduce yourselves in the chat. So please share your name, your organization, where you're zooming in from, and what are you eating for lunch today? Let's share what we're having for lunch. One, we're doing this to make ourselves hungry with all the delicious food that folks are eating, and also to encourage people, including you, to eat lunch. Because I don't know about you, but sometimes Zoom meetings can take over your day and you forget to actually do some basic things like feed yourself. So please introduce your name, introduce yourself with your name, your organization, where you are, and how you're nourishing your body today. That would be great. While you do that in the chat, I want to tell you a little bit about Together Bay Area. We're a regional coalition of nonprofits, public agencies, and local Native American tribes and communities. And we're working for climate resilience and equity. Our members are in the 9 counties of the Bay Area plus Santa Cruz, and all working in lots of different ways for healthy lands, healthy people, and healthy communities. In addition to convening things like this and our spring conference, which is coming up in the first week of May, we also are the steward of the Conservation Lands Network, which we're going to hear more about today. Why are we hosting this webinar? First, I want to share, and we'll talk more about it in a few minutes, but that 30 by 30, if I'm assuming that folks know what it is, but just to be really clear, that it is the goal of conserving 30% of California's lands and waters by the year 2030. And I invite you to learn more information about the state's initiative and the work that California Natural Resources Agency is doing. Laura just put the link to their website. I really encourage you to sign up for the email, their newsletter, their email list, because there's a lot of information that they share. I see a few folks from CNRA here, which is great, so that we have representation. Thank you so much. I see Jason, John, and others. So it's really great that you're here, and I really encourage you to sign up for their e-newsletter, follow them on social. 30 by 30 is a golden opportunity to do the work that we all on this call know we need to do, and especially for biodiversity and for the climate crisis. And we believe that we need 30 by 30 to succeed, not just for our organizations or for this coalition's sake, not just for those involved's sake, but the plants, the animals, the ecosystems, including humans that depend on the planet, need 30 by 30 to be successful here in California and beyond. It's not just a nice to have, it's really essential for health, for public health, for economies, communities, businesses. This is more than just plants and animals. This is really much bigger than that, and a really great opportunity to make it happen. Relatedly, I want to highlight something that's happening that's really exciting within California Natural Resources Agency, and that's their Tribal Nature-Based Solutions Grant Program. It's a really exciting, just kind of mind-blowing thing that's happening with the state, where they've identified $100 million that will be available to assist California Native American tribes in advancing multi-benefit nature-based solutions in their communities. One, that's a lot of money, and two, it's really taking on some of the environmental justice work that we need to do as a state and beyond. And right now they're soliciting input on the guidelines for those grants. And from what I understand, they want input from not just tribal entities, but also land trusts and other organizations that can partner with tribes. And the deadline for that input is May 5th. And Laura just dropped the link in the chat for that. So I encourage you all to check it out because it's related to 30 by 30. It's also really important to recognize the work that's happening to build allies and alliances with Native American tribes. And I want to highlight that. So we're hosting today's webinar because we want 30 by 30 to succeed, because we believe in regional conservation and regional collaboration. We want your projects to be implemented, and we want to work together. And also 30 by 30 is a dance. It's a dance between local, regional, state, federal, and global. And at each one of those levels, there's different roles to play, different dance moves to do. So we're going to learn some of the things today about what can happen at the local level to feed into the state level. And I'm hoping that our speakers today will show off some of their dance moves too. All right, so today we're going to learn about California Protected Areas Database. I'm going to say a bunch of acronyms that they're going to explain. CPAD, CCED, GAP codes, and CLN. We're going to hear from some great colleagues that are very knowledgeable in this space, and I'm really excited to get there. A few housekeeping notes. Please enjoy your lunch. Stand up, move around, listen. Really encourage you to take care of yourself while we do this. Please ask questions in the chat. We will address them at the end of the presentation, but we really want to hear what your questions are. This is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel soon. So with that, I'm really excited to introduce a friend and colleague, Dan Rademacher with Green Info Network, who will take it away.
Thanks, Annie. Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Rademacher, Green Info Network, and we are excited here today to talk about 30 by 30 and our work with the California Protected Areas Database and Conservation Easements Database, and really to debut. We've debuted a lot of things in the Bay Area, including way back when the origins of CPAD in the Bay Area Protected Areas Database. So we're debuting our 30 by 30 toolkit with you all as well. So I appreciate you all being here for that. And we're going to talk about protected lands and what the difference is between protected lands in CPAD and CCED and conserved lands for 30 by 30. And then I'm going to hand it over to Tom Robinson to talk more about the Conservation Lands Network and CPAD, CCED, and 30 by 30. And then I'm going to hand it, and then Tom will hand it off to Amanda Kohanek from Green Info, who manages CPAD and CCED and has been developing the toolkit that we are excited to share with you today. And then we'll have some time for Q&A and discussion at the end. First we are gonna have a few polls throughout the time. So let's see how familiar folks are with 30 by 30. And we'll just take maybe a few seconds here for response. All right, Annie, that's maybe enough time. Feels like enough time. I can have more time in the future if we feel like it wasn't enough time. Let's see. All right, so everybody's heard of it. Everybody's at least heard of it, and folks are somewhat familiar with it. About half are somewhat familiar with it, and half are very familiar with it. Excellent. Okay, good stuff. So I won't spend too much time on this then, but it's conserving 30% of California's land and coastal waters by 2030. And this was based on a executive order from Governor Newsom. And we are all in the process of figuring out how to achieve that vision. Although in the Bay Area, as Tom will talk about later, we're well on our way. And do people know where we are now? So let's do another poll. And we didn't include the decimals on this, so you can just round. And give that 30 seconds or so. And let's see how we're doing now. Okay. Oh, interesting. So we've got guesses, the most guesses are 30% or more. Okay, well, let's see where we really are. So according to the CA Nature website maintained by the Natural Resources Agency, we have about 24.1 million acres conserved, and that's just under 24% of the state. And that's what that looks like on a statewide map. It's handy, in my opinion, anyway, that California is it's 101 million acres, but you can just call it 100. And then that makes it really easy to figure out these percentages, right? So if we have about 24 million acres conserved now, that's about 24%, and there's about 6 million acres to go. And separately, the coastal waters are at about 16%. And we won't be talking about those today. We're all about land-based conservation in this conversation and the work that we're doing, because that's the coverage of the protected areas database and the conservation easements database. So what counts as conserved? So there's a couple things. Land must be protected, so it has to be present in CPAD or CCED. That's fee-owned lands in the protected areas database, and easements in the easements database, and have a deed or an easement to provide permanent protection. And then it has to durably prioritize biodiversity. And that fits into something called GAP code 1 or 2. And those are a poll I don't think we have is, oh yeah, we do. We'll talk more about what those GAP codes are and what that means. But it has to emphasize biodiversity in a management plan. And that management plan has to aim to largely retain natural land cover. And so protected lands come from 2 GIS databases, as I mentioned, that we maintain. California Protected Areas Database, that's lands owned in fee and protected for open space purposes, and the California Conservation Easements Database, and that's lands protected under conservation easements, including both these lands would be by many people on this call, organizations that you all work at. There's a lot more about these, and download them and other resources that we'll be sharing at calands.org. And as I'll show on a map in a bit, not all lands in CPAD and CCED qualify for 30 by 30. And some of that is because they don't, and some of that is because we don't have enough data, and that's why we're here today. So CPAD and CCED are, we're a little biased since we maintain them, but they are the best statewide protected areas data in the US. And largely that's because of the collective action of more than 1,000 agencies over more than a decade to make those data sets as good as they can possibly be, but they can always be better. And tracking gap codes in particular is not something that's been a top priority for us in the past. And so that's a change here today and this year with 30 by 30 of really prioritizing our ability to take local knowledge, which has always been the foundation of CPAD and CCED, that you all know your lands best, and getting that local knowledge for gap codes in particular into the data set so it can feed up into that statewide accounting for 30 by 30. And we're going to tell you how we need your help, and we'll tell you how to do that over the course of this webinar. And so one thing that's certainly come up in the past year or more, is that, like in the Bay Area, what shows as conserved for 30 by 30 is what is different from what's in CPAD and CCED. And so the green here is 30 by 30 conserved, and the blue and light blue are CPAD and CCED. And sometimes that's correct. Very small lands that you can't see here that are in CPAD also serves a lot of recreation purposes, soccer fields, ball fields, running tracks. Those things are not biodiversity. They're important recreation resources. And then other lands that may be not managed primarily for biodiversity may also properly be not included. But a lot of lands probably are conserved by everybody's definition, and it's a matter of getting that data in place with your help. So biodiversity protection is what, this is how I think about it, is that 30 by 30 is measuring biodiversity protection, and that's what GAP 1 and 2 does. It's not measuring presence of biodiversity. Is there a durable plan for protecting biodiversity? And is that plan aimed at protection of natural land cover on the order of 95% plus? And there is gap data in CPAD now. And that often comes from the protected areas database of the United States. So our data flows up to that national data set, and then historically gap codes have flowed back down to us. It's a federal data standard. It was somewhat invented with federal lands in mind, and those assignments are often done using a base of assumptions about how specific agencies manage their land. And that actually can work reasonably well at the federal level when they look at how the National Park Service or another agency manages their land. But it doesn't trickle down to 1,000 agencies in California, much less to local agencies around the whole country. And that's why we want local authoritative data from you all and anyone else who has lands in CPAD or CCED. Gap code lands are not the only thing that 30 by 30 is considering. There's also something called other effective area-based conservation measures. And it's important to think about how these meet a lot of other goals in the pathways document for 30 by 30. They might be places where protection is temporary but still important, or they're providing biodiversity goal protection, but it's not the primary goal. They're very small. So these are all things that might be important contributors to 30 by 30, but don't quite fit into the GAP 1 and 2 lands that would be included in CPAD and CCED. So it's important to know that this is another part of 30 by 30 that is another way for lands to contribute to the overall goal. And I won't go through this chart, but essentially there's a dichotomous key, a series of yes/no questions that can help anyone assign gap codes to lands or parts of lands that they own or manage. And this is also on website and toolkit links that we'll be providing. And so these are a series of yes/no questions that you can answer that will guide you to what is the gap code assignment that makes the most sense for you. And on the website toolkit, we also have this in form-based yes/no questions that can walk you through it in addition to an image. So GAP 1 is permanent protection from conversion of natural land cover and a mandated management plan in operation to maintain a natural state within which disturbance events are allowed to proceed. So these are sort of the keywords highlighted here of what makes something GAP 1. And so this again is part of what counts for 30 by 30 conserved. GAP 2 is very similar, except that it does allow uses or management practices that degrade the quality of existing natural communities, such as suppression of wildfire or insect outbreaks, but you're still protecting from conversion of natural land cover, and you still have a management plan in operation to maintain the land in a primarily natural state. So those are the two categories that fit in 30 by 30 conserved definition. GAP 3 is still permanently protected for a majority of the area, so less than that 95% threshold. And there can also be things like logging or off-highway vehicles, mining, And you would also have protection for federally listed endangered and threatened species throughout the area. But again, you're not protecting 95% or more of the natural land cover for the area that would get you into that gap 1 or 2 status. And then gap 4 is basically either we don't know anything, or there's no management plan and there's no protection. So this is the sort of catch-all category for protected open space lands that we believe are owned by an agency that would protect them as open space, but they may not have any mandates for any kind of biodiversity prioritization. And then the the other effective area-based conservation measures, this is pulled right out of the Pathways to 30 by 30 document. And I just think that the examples are helpful here in terms of organic farms, community gardens, Williamson Act lands, wildlife crossings, things that, you know, like a wildlife crossing, for example, may not be quite big enough to map as a property, but it's an important element. Organic farms may not primarily prioritize biodiversity, but they provide habitat value in a lot of different ways. So this is an important category as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Tom Robinson. Wow, that's a long link someone just put in the chat. Sorry.
Yeah, please. Thanks, Dan. So yes, I'm Tom Robinson. I manage the Conservation Lands Network program or project for Together Bay Area. And we thought it would be a good idea to bring the Conservation Lands Network into this discussion at this point, because there are real parallels between 30 by 30 and the Conservation Lands Network. And the use of protected areas for those two initiatives. So there are some real parallels. There's some real differences as well when it comes to the conserved land. What do we, you know, how do we define conserved land? And the Conservation Lands Network, next slide, is, oh, we were going to do a poll. That's right. Let's do this quick poll. I don't want to lead the witness, so I won't say anything more. So we'll pause here for a quick click, if you don't mind. All right, let's see the results. Okay, cool. So I'm seeing that about a third have used it, almost half have heard of it, and about a quarter of you don't know about it. So I'm not going to take too much time to go into the Conservation Lands Network, but for the quarter of you who have never heard of it, I'm happy to introduce it just briefly here. So the Conservation Lands Network is, you can kind of think of it as 30 by 30 for the Bay Area, even though it was it started a long time before the 30 by 30 initiatives, both at the national level and the statewide level were started. And also a key difference is that in the Bay Area, the Conservation Lands Network supports a goal of 50% by 2050, so 50 by 50. And the idea there is that in urban and urbanizing areas like the Bay Area, 30% doesn't cut it. We actually need more like 50% in order to give nature a fighting chance to withstand the pressures of human activity and climate change. Next slide. So what the CLN is, it's a regional conservation vision that was launched back in 2011 and has been collaboratively updated ever since. And Dan, since thank you. We'll go ahead and just load the bullet points. It's a vision and strategy for the Bay Area, the 9-county Bay Area plus Santa Cruz. We consider that sort of an eco region. And the core of the CLN are habitat goals that are expert driven, and they support investments in both land protection and stewardship from around the Bay Area. And on the right, you can see the map of priority areas. We call them essential lands in the Conservation Lands Network. Next bullet. And again, it supports a vision of 50 by 50. Next bullet. And it was launched back in 2011, and it's been updated twice since. So it's a long-running program. And we're actually gearing up for another update coming up. And you can find out all you'd like, next bullet, at bayarealands.org. So check it out. But I want to tell you a little bit, I want to kind of dive into the guts of like how the Conservation Lands Network and the the CPAD and CCED are sort of interwoven. And Dan, go ahead and just load it all up. So as I mentioned, the Conservation Lands Network is an inspiring vision, 50 by 50, that focuses conservation efforts in the region, but it also is an accounting framework to track and communicate progress, a lot like a thermometer on the wall at the local elementary school. Next slide. So, for example, if we took just a little chunk of the Bay Area, and I just chose Santa Cruz here, and we looked at these expert-driven conservation priorities or these goals, we'd find these different habitats have been given different percent goals. So a rank 1, for instance, the goal is 90% of the remaining, 90% of that habitat type in that specific area of the Bay Area. A rank 2 gets 75%, a rank 3 gets 50%, and a rank 4, which are cultivated agriculture and urban areas, gets 0%. We don't actually prioritize habitat in those areas. And those translate, we could use the Conservation Protected Areas Database, the California Protected Areas Database, and the CCED to determine how much of those habitats are conserved. You can see on the right, we're doing pretty well with California sagebrush, pretty well with redwood forest, and not as well with knobcone pine. Next slide. So the next thing we can do is we can, with your help, as the CPAD and the CCED data sets are updated, we can take a temperature reading over time, next slide, and determine our progress toward those goals. And one more click. You can see in that intervening time between 2010 and 2018, we met our California sagebrush goals and made good progress on our redwood, but not so much on the knobcone pine. So that's actually some wins there, and there's also some kind of motivation to look at certain habitats that are getting maybe the short shrift in our efforts to conserve land. So next slide. So it's an accounting framework. But the other thing that the Protected Areas Database play a huge role in that accounting framework. The other thing that it plays a role in is that we actually, in our modeling to determine where those priority lands should be based on those habitat goals, we start with the conserved lands. So the modeling actually kind of emerges from the existing conserved lands. So in that way, the CPAD and the CCED actually form the backbone of our priority network in the Bay Area. Next slide. And if we were to look at this, if we were to sort of juxtapose what's considered conserved in the CLN versus what is being mapped as status 1, 2, 3, or 4, we find that there are some real differences. So a lot of the gray area there is that's listed as category 4, but I think we know that that's actually probably more of a no data thing. This is exactly why we all really need to help Green Info update these data. And so we know that some of these lands, especially, I grabbed this screenshot because there's so much conserved land in Western Marin there through conservation easements in Southern Sonoma County. And we consider that all conserved land in the Bay Area. And so we need to get those statuses correct. But even if the state decides to stick with status 1 and 2, that's good for their reasons. And it is okay for us at the regional level, and that includes not just the Bay Area, but other regions that might set their own priorities. It's okay to set to consider conservation easements, parkland as conserved, just as we're doing with the Conservation Lands Network. Next slide. So let's just summarize these sort of different thresholds. So the CLN considers conserved many GAP status 3 lands. Conservation easements are an effective conservation tool in the Bay Area because land's expensive. And we have really great conservation organizations that are, they have very rigorous methods to negotiate their conservation easements. Next bullet. And parkland in the Bay Area is well stewarded. And most have, kind of a dedicated status that generally prohibit extractive uses. So we certainly consider those conserved as well. But the CLN doesn't include everything in the CPAD and the CCED. Go ahead and click through. Like OHV parks, small city parks, and golf courses. So we pull all of those out before we use them in the CLN. Next slide. And so just in summary, the CPAD and the CCED protected lands form the foundation of the conservation lands network, both for the network itself and that modeling and the accounting framework. And with the CLN's 50 by 50 goal, the regional conservation here in the Bay Area is already well aligned with the 30 by 30 goal. And most importantly, as we all kind of link arms to improve the CPAD and the CCED, those edits, both geometry and the attributes, whether it's the gap status or any other kind of attribute information, will feed directly into one single repository that really helps out the CLN. And it's also, because Green Info is involved with the state, it's going to help 30 by 30 as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda to bring us home.
Very good. Thank you, Dan and Tom. So now that you have heard a bit about the importance of CPAD and CCED, hopefully you're interested in helping us get it as accurate as possible. It is quite good, and it will always need improvements in an ongoing living database. So we can go ahead and get started. So when we started this process, we took a minute to think about how we wanted to approach it. And I just wanted to call out a few important details. One is that we expect a lot of information from a lot of agencies. We have over 1,000 that could be contributing. So we need to find a balance between being systematic and being able to pull that information in efficiently, but also being flexible. And a key reason for flexibility is that the groups we're working with are going to have a wide range of technical capacities. Many will feel quite comfortable using GIS, some will never have heard of it. Some won't have software licensing. So we need to be able to accommodate a broad scope of folks who can engage with this and have the key information that we need. So we need to be very nimble in that regard. And then also, as Dan said, you guys are the most knowledgeable about your lands. So we want to take the information that you have and but we want to get it into the system in the way that it's used by both CLN and 30 by 30 appropriately. So trying to crosswalk the information so that you're putting the information in that you feel is accurate, and we're able to make sure that gets represented down through the system into CLN and 30 by 30. Next slide. So what we've come up with, and this is sort of the unofficial release of it, is development of a toolkit where we're trying to provide multiple different ways folks can engage with the information and provide us data back. So today's going to be a pretty brief overview, but I want to walk you through who is this for. First of all, the audience for this would be mostly folks like yourselves that work at organizations and agencies that manage lands. You're looking to look at the accuracy of your data in the databases of CPAD and CCED, and where they're inaccurate, lacking, or need change, you can then submit information to us to have that happen. So within the toolkit, you'll find instructions. Those will be built continuously as we go. So we have some to start with, but we do anticipate soliciting feedback. So if you find something's not working, or you have questions, or there's not enough information, we do try to aim to update those as we go. So like Dan showed, there will be the dichotomous key flow chart. We anticipate posting videos such as this if you want to come back to the materials, and also just simply having someone you can contact, email, or call when you have questions and you just need to talk with someone to help find that answer. Within the toolkit, you also find a few different options. There will be GIS shapefiles that we'll walk through, along with tables, and then a few options for how you can view maps of different properties. So that's the link down below. Next slide. So when you go to that site, you'll notice what we've done is filtered CPAD and CCED down to a per agency zip file. You can go download the full databases of CPAD and CCED. Those are readily available. Many of you probably have already used them or seen them. But what this has done is filtered down just to one specific agency and also the key information that's really critical to get right. We're hopeful that this will help you focus your editing and your reviews in on the key elements that will feed into both CLN and 30 by 30 updates coming up. So we'll walk through sort of a quick example here. And for this, I've just selected the Nature Conservancy. When you come to the site, you can page through and look at all the different agency files available, or you can use a search, as I have highlighted here in the upper right, where you can use keywords and then find the file that you would like to download. So once you download that file, you can store that locally and unzip it in the working directory that you want to use. So now I'll walk you quickly through, if you are comfortable in using GIS and you think that's the way that you want to review your lands, this would be the overall workflow that we envision that. You would download and unzip your toolkit, and then what you would have is a set of shape files. Those would be for your fee properties and for your easement properties. When you open those, you can put them in whatever GIS, ArcMap, ArcPro, QGIS, whatever software works for you. And then you can load the information you might already have that's relevant. So if roads or hydrology are particularly important, or perhaps you already have your own layer of your protected lands and you just want to make sure they look right, that gives you the flexibility to put that information in there. You'll notice the dark green outline is, in this case, the Jack Dangermond Preserve. That's the full park or property in this instance. A lot of times we also have the information of what's contained within it, which is generally a parcel. So in this case, you can see there are many parcels that build up to this park. If you find that the detailed information of looking down at the subpieces is helpful, it's there and you're free to use it. If you think, no, my agency just manages this larger property as one holistic piece, you're welcome to just use that. But what we're trying to do is give you those two options. So if you looked at this in your GIS program and thought, well, this is wrong, I need to include, exclude spatial area, we would just invite you to correct it, edit that actual shapefile, and then send that back to us. Alongside that, you'll see in the lower portion of the slide the attributes that we're hoping to get information in your review on. So this will show the name of we have for the park or property, if the public is allowed to access that or not. You'll note that it has the managing agency. So if you say, hey, I don't actually own this, it's so-and-so agency, you could change that so that we can then assign it to the proper agency. One key thing here is the year established, and I wanted to note that Tom brought this up in showing change over time. This is a critical piece, and we have a lot of the information in the Bay Area, but if you happen to know the year that the property became protected, that really helps us with time series analysis and making that as accurate as possible. So that has been included. And then there are also area for notes and gap code assignment that can be provided. So in all these instances, you can make your changes to your attributes, you can make changes to the shapefile, and then you can just send it back to us. There's no need to flag anything. We'll do a full change analysis and extract any updates that you've provided. Next slide. So if you say, I don't use GIS or I don't want to use GIS, I'm not able, if for whatever reason that option is not going to work for you, we do also offer a table. So you can see on the bottom, this is the table of the lands that we currently have assigned that the Nature Conservancy manages in the state of California. It has the same attribute information that was shown on the previous slide with the name, the access level. And so you can enter changes to that in the columns highlighted over to the right in yellow if you feel like the name is inaccurate, manager, access, etc. Because we still think most people will find it useful to view the property, we've included sort of in the middle here in column G, a link that will take you directly to the map. And in this instance, I've clicked on the Dangermond Preserve again. It will pull up that same shape that you saw on the GIS version. It's the broader, just large property, but this will allow you to see the property online on a map without needing GIS capacity. In terms of making edits, you could come back any number of ways and tell us if we need to change the shape. You could submit it through this online application where the map is. There are options to do that that would be covered in a Toolkit training session and instructions, or you could just simply type information into column H. And that information can just get sent back to us once you've filled out the table, and we'll pull that into the data. I did also want to acknowledge that both with GIS and this table, you may already have existing files and you may not want to recreate them. It's also fine to send us information you already have. If you already have PDF maps or a shapefile of your properties, we do welcome you just sending that information to us. Next slide. So alongside the toolkit, which I consider the pieces that are downloaded when you get the zip file, we also have sort of supplemental materials that are options. So Map Collaborator, as I just showed, would be the option where you can look through a URL at your properties online on a map. We can also provide you with PDF maps. I showed a few samples on the right for CAL FIRE. The first one is a fee property, where you can see that this demonstration forest is comprised of, I don't know, 10 to 12 different parcels, and you could submit information back to us if you felt that was inaccurate, or you could review it and simply determine that it was accurate. On the right is an example of an easement. So for the Rainbow Ridge, these are the parcels that are comprised to make that easement. Again, we'd welcome you sending feedback on those if need be. Another option is if you're more comfortable in Google Earth, we're happy to send you a KML or a KMZ. And the reason these haven't been provided in all the toolkits is it really bulks the file size up for folks, and we don't anticipate they'll get super wide use. So we do send them to you upon request, but please feel free to request them. They're easily automatically generated. So we're happy to provide those. And as I noted on the previous slide, if you already have other information, maybe you just have a list of the parcel numbers that a property is in, we're happy to accept those also. So just a few examples of other supporting information you can send us to update your lands. Next slide. So overall, there are some important deadlines to keep in mind. The first one coming up is May 31st, which is if you want us to try to include updates to your lands or your gap codes, the key would be to get those in by May 31st. Those can be submitted in any number of ways. The toolkit outlines how you can get information back to us. You're also free to reach out to me directly. We aim to include as many submissions for edits as we can by that, but we also don't know how many we're going to receive. So we'll do our best effort to get them all included if we can by the June release. Any that don't make it in will go into the December or end of the year release of CPAD and CCED. And that's important because that's the file that CNRA will be using for their spring 2024 update. So that's the next time you'll see a large significant change to the 30 by 30 conserved lands layer that incorporates local feedback, both on property adjustments, inclusions, and gap code assignments where you have either entered data that we didn't previously have or made a correction where you felt like it was not accurate. So that is a very high level overview. We do plan to have more toolkit training sessions. As you can see, we're actually not quite into April yet, so this is a bit of a preview of the toolkit. But I think we had one slide here, Dan, where we had one last poll, which was that we wanted to throw out a broad request of if you could please let us know what types of other support would be useful to you in walking through the process of updating your lands in CPAD and CCED and for gap code assignment. So if any of these resonate with you, please feel free to submit them here. You're also welcome to follow up by email or Q&A on those. So I think that is it. We can give folks a few more minutes to pick. Oh, sorry, I think we had intended multiple choice, but you can pick what's most important for you to have in terms of support. And with that, I think that wraps up my portion. Annie, do you want to see if the results are somewhat complete? There we go. Videos. Good to know. Pretty broad support, though, across the range of options that we might have. All right, so I think we are ready to move to Q&A.
Let's see, I think Annie, you were gonna.
Yep, sorry, finding buttons on the screen. Thank you, Amanda and Dan and Tom. One question that came in the chat, and this is a plug to add your questions to the chat if you haven't already, is around, let me find it. Sorry, it's coming. How do traditional management practices used by Native Americans map onto the gap code determinations? Can you talk a little bit about both management practices as well as traditional ecological knowledge and the work that Native Americans are increasingly doing across the state?
Dan, do you want to take that one and I follow up, or do you want me to?
Sure. Well, let's see. I think that, well, Tom, do you have a ready answer?
Well, I would just say, as your summary of the definitions really very clearly outlined, the sort of the thresholds for the different categories are they're quite they're coming from a very technocratic tradition, one that's looking at physical evidence of a restriction, a mandate, some sort of codified, memorialized, piece of paper of some sort. And so I think the short answer is that rubric doesn't track well with traditional ecological knowledge and Native American practices, because those are at best sort of in academic books, and also just anecdotally and in the minds of people. So there's a real mismatch between one world and the other, unfortunately. It's a great question.
Yes, and one thing I want to just sort of highlight, in CPAD and CCED consider tribal lands to be sovereign nation. So they're not included unless they're asked to be included, because they feel they're meant to be a public resource. And that's not because we don't think they meet the objectives of protection and long-term biodiversity. It's more out of the fact that they're not public lands. So I do think that 30 by 30 has to and needs to account for them in different ways technically, for some of the reasons Tom highlighted.
Great.
And
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Dan, you want to add anything? You're welcome to. No.
Well, that was just in terms of, Amanda, that comment would apply to sort of connecting those two comments. That would apply to lands where there is that piece of paper, as opposed to what I think is really wonderful, more expansive vision for prioritizing tribal management in the pathways document, that I think we need to have new ways of measuring, mapping, and counting those things as they happen, outside of this GAP 1 and 2 framework. And whether that fits into the other effective area-based conservation measures, how exactly that fits in, I think is something that needs to be figured out.
Great, thank you. Just want to acknowledge there's lots of different frameworks at play here, and that I think 30 by 30 is trying to lead and is having conversations that haven't been had in the past at a statewide scale, and there's a lot of pioneering that's happening, and there's also a lot of figuring out systems to support this systems change and the environmental social change that's happening. Other questions, and lots of great ones. Thank you so much to those who are asking them. Another is, what is the CPAD CCED percentage for the Bay Area?
I can answer that. We are just as of actually a couple of years ago now. I need to recalculate, but we're at 30%. We sort of at the Bay Area, and again, this is looking at sort of our local definition of conserved. We're at about 30%, and that was achieved right around 2020. So it was kind of 30 by 20 here in the Bay Area. But the percent as it relates to the gap 1 and gap 2 status. Dan, do you know the answer to that? Did you?
We don't have that calculated, partly because what we really want to do, I mean, I think right now it would show what you had in that screenshot, Tom, of like, this is how much we don't know, that we want that, do this sort of effort to get get data from you all, and then run the calculation once we've actually done outreach for local data on this topic.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, I'm just looking at the dashboard now, and it looks to be about 700,000 acres are considered gap 1 or 2. So, you know, that's what, 16th of the area of the Bay Area. Is that right? Or sorry, about an 1/8. That would be about an 1/8.
12.5%.
But I think your answer is actually more germane, that perhaps that's not necessarily, you know, we need to improve the accuracy of even those numbers together.
Speaking of, here's a question about assigning different gap codes to different parts of a property. For example, for an ag easement, would it be appropriate to assign a gap code 4 to a majority of the property, but to assign a gap 1 or 2 to distinct areas designated for biodiversity or habitat? Can you talk about some of the parcelization and within a park, within a unit?
Yes. One thing that we've been testing out gap codes. We used them at the federal and a few state agencies before we got to this point to help answer some of that. And the short answer is yes. We allow you to say a property is a percentage of different gap codes. You can have all 4 gap codes present within your property, and we ask that you assign to us what percentage or what number of acres fall within each of those gap codes. You don't have to spatially define where it falls. So if you know that 10% of your easement is gap 1 and the rest is gap 3, you can just give us those percentages or acreage numbers. But yes, the system does allow for that nuance of mixed gap codes within a property.
Fabulous. Here's another question that on the CA Nature site, there is or was a form for agencies to petition for changes. Based on today's presentation, it seems like we can provide updates through the process in the toolkit and the links that you've shared. Just want to make sure that that's correct and the best way for folks to provide updates.
Yes. So we do work with CNRA. That was sort of the precursor to getting people had initial input saying we want to fix things. So we do still get reports from them when people file those requests, but it is much more direct to just come through us directly now with the toolkit. So that is the preferred method, is get in direct contact with Green Info, and we will help you through the toolkit or other methods if need be to do your updates. Great.
Here's a question about what's included in gap 1, gap 2 codes. Some fella named Stuart Weiss asked if you have any thoughts on sustainable or carbon credit forestry for inclusion. And I don't know if this is the group that's working on what's included in those gap codes, as it's a system that's bigger than the toolkit that you're creating and sharing with us. But I wonder if I'm wrong and missing something, or if you have thoughts you want to share on that.
Yeah, one key thing I will say is that gap codes are very complex, and this system of 1 through 4 looks artificially simple. We anticipate that one of the biggest needs will be sort of smaller working groups, perhaps, and agencies that manage lands in similar ways working together to come up with what is sort of termed conceptual consistency. So you're each able to report your own gap codes, but you feel consistent with each other, within each other in the community that you're representing them similarly in the gap code. So yes, that's definitely going to be one of the more difficult portions of this work.
When I look at the definition of gap 2, and I feel like, you know, if you manage that forest for carbon, but also for biodiversity, then it should still be able to, it's interesting because I feel like it might qualify for gap 2, but not because you're managing it for carbon. Mm-hmm. But we're also, we're making the toolkit and sort of trying to interpret along with everybody together. So
And interestingly, a large preserve in Sonoma County that is managed for carbon is listed as currently as a gap status 2. Just, incidentally.
There you go.
Yeah. Precedent, exactly.
Well, and also that speaks to the complexity of it. I mean, just to underscore your point, Amanda, that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, or just even the numbers 30% and 2030. If those two numbers, 30 and 30, are also very complex.
Mhm.
Great. We have a question about clarifying the data lifecycle between CPAD and 30 by 30. Like if we report it to CPAD, does it magically propagate to 30 by 30? And if I could add something to that question, also how the connection between CPAD data and the CLN and how those, can you talk about
It's all magic.
I'd like to call it auto magical.
Auto magical, yeah. So the way we're thinking about it in relation to 30 by 30 is that the June data, the May 31st deadline is, for us, it's another release of CPAD and CCED, and we always want the data to be better. In this particular case, it's almost like a practice run for a future update of 30 by 30 that will happen in spring of 2024. And then the October 31 deadline is like the final deadline of like, okay, now we're going to get everything in that is going to be in that next update. And then in spring 2024, we would see a change on the CA Nature website and some change hopefully in the percentage. And also if you zoom in on the map, that's when you'll see your land. So for folks who are able to contribute data by May 31 and, barring the deluge of edits that we might get, that we're able to get that into the June release, you would see there like, okay, my data, my lands are correct. The gap codes look like what I wanted. I don't yet see it on CA Nature, but that's expected because there's not an update yet coming there. And then, in the event that there's something we didn't get right, or there's some further improvement that's needed, we have time to do that. And then the final release of this year that comes out in December 2023 would be the one that feeds into the 2024 update.
Yes, and this is definitely build as you go. So one thing I want to note is that we advocated for doing a mid-year release that when you look at information, you can also look for examples. So maybe a property that looks similar to yours and you think that agency has updated their data. On the gap codes, you can go identify the gap code and see if it's been contributed by the local agency. And so we can start to build conceptual consistency on this sort of iterative process that we're working through. And also anyone else who uses CPAD or CCED, so CLN and other projects, they'll get all of those updates sooner. But CNRA will be using the 2023B to do their update.
Fabulous. Tom?
Well, am I the only one who's going to start using conceptual consistency more in my parlance? I'm sure I'm not alone.
I took it from someone else at
CNRA.
CNRA.
Yes. The only thing I would add is that historically the Bay Area Open Space Council, before Together Bay Area and now Together Bay Area, would spark or even sponsor, using grant money from the Coastal Conservancy and others, to update the Bay Area portion of the CPAD and the CCED. And so we want to continue doing that, but at the same time, it's super serendipitous and would be the smart thing to do to sort of align with the 30 by 30 efforts. And we're going to be piggybacking on this push, and we'll be doing a progress report using this update that we're all say it together. We're all going to help Green Info implement.
Awesome. Join me in thanking Dan, Amanda, and Tom for their time today. And also, I don't know how many hours thinking through all the things to make this accessible and easy to understand. So thank you, Dan, Amanda, and Tom. And thank you all for your questions, for spending an hour with us. We will follow up with information, with links, and really encourage you to get in touch with these folks and jump on in and help the regional and statewide data sets be accurate and effective and successful. And I want to leave with you all with conceptual consistency and with automagical updates. And have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you so much for coming.